Hello, and welcome back for episode 3 of the Pos-cast with Rabbi Shmuel Posner and myself, Seth Hellman. Rabbi, how you doing today?
Baruch Hashem. Right, and the number 3 is very important because in halacha, as you know, since you do daf yomi, you know the idea of chazaka happens after 3 times. So, for example, if a person owns a field and somebody comes and says it's my field, he has to prove documentation that it's his field. You can't just say it's mine. But if he's in the field for 3 years and he has witnesses that he worked the field for 3 years, then he doesn't have to have any documentation anymore. So the fact that we're doing the third one today is very, very meaningful and important. Before you start with your questions and get the conversation going, I just want to say that we've gotten some feedback, which is nice. It's always nice to get feedback. So far, positive.
We only accept positive feedback here. You're not allowed to give us any negative feedback at all.
No. Constructive feedback is always good. But let me tell you how far this has gone. So on Thursday night at 10 o'clock, a bunch of shluchim on campus, on Zoom, learn a sikha from the Rebbe. One of the sikhas, there's a thing called Project Likkutei Sichos, where they've divided all the Likkutei Sichos, all 29 volumes, and to learn 2 of them, two talks a week on that week's parsha. So we learn one of those sichos, and then there's a fabringen, a Zoom fabringen. So during the pandemic, I was like, yeah, let's fabring. But now I got to wake up in the morning.
There was the record breaking for bringing.
Right. This is a minor one. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, one of these, a shliach, I think he's from Minnesota or somewhere, he says, so you really think that every college student, after they finish college, should go to yeshiva? Like, where'd you hear that? And so he got into this whole discussion about whether, if he thought everybody, should you go, should not go to yeshiva? And I said, yeshiva is like summer camp for kids. And he knew what I was talking about. And actually somebody posted on our chat, yeshiva is like summer camp. The Rebbe spoke about summer camp, and especially overnight camp, where a child goes into an environment that's totally Jewish. I mean, it's lots of fun. There's sports and all that kind of stuff, but it's like completely under the auspices of a very holy Jewish environment. And so it's full time. Like you go to school from the morning to the evening. And I can say personally that I learned a lot in camp. You're with other kids and you see how things are done or not done. And there's a lot of great stuff that happens in summer camp. And so in a similar way, you go to yeshiva like we spoke last week. The total immersion thing. But anyway, the point is that some shliach out there in Minnesota or wherever it was heard episode 2.
Well, it's good. It's good to know that we have good listeners and important listeners from across the country. So I want to go back to something, speaking of episode 2, I want to go back to something that we discussed last week that I don't think, maybe I didn't ask the question as clearly as I wanted to, and we got a little bit sidetracked. But one of the questions that I asked was about the Chabad tradition of just not shaving at all throughout the year. And so I was curious about where that comes from and what that tradition holds, seeing as it is Lag BaOmer time and many Jews will be shaving and getting haircuts throughout the rest of this week.
Okay. And it's also very timely because we had it in last week's parsha. Not the one we just read this week, the one before that. Anyway, shaving, beards. So, one of the things is sort of like a throwaway line, but really it's pretty important. It's like if you ask somebody, did Moshe Rabbeinu have a beard? Did the Rambam have a beard? What would your answer be?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course. So I rest my case. You don't have to go any further. Every important Jew you think about has a beard. You ask somebody to draw a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu, there's always a beard there. Or any other famous rabbi in the past has a beard. And we have a pasuk, it's a hadras panim zaken, that the beauty of the face is the beard. Now, there is a fellow, he's a little bit older than I am, in Crown Heights, who this has been his mission in life. He printed a book, I think it's 1,000 pages, called The Beard Book. That's what it's called. It's called Hados Panim Zakan. The beauty of the face is the beard. And he brings all these different opinions. And pretty much, I've never read his book, I'll be honest with you. But I think the point is, I did glance through it a little bit, that there are many opinions that say that that even across Hasidish, not Hasidish, that a person should have a beard from a halachic point of view. And I'm not going to get into all the details about this shaver and that shaver and the other shaver, but so that's one thing, that it seems to be a good thing to have a beard, and it seems to be a Jewish thing to have a beard. Specifically, in Chabad, the Tzemach Tzedek gives a halachic ruling that a person has to have a beard. And it's not only based on the prohibition about not cutting the corners of your... Oh, I know, the beard thing was actually in today's Rambam. That's why I remember it. Anyway, but there's a prohibition of a man not wearing women's clothing, a woman not wearing men's clothing. It doesn't just mean clothing, it just means being dressed or looking like a man or a woman. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that shaving your beard goes on in that category of not dressing like a woman. So that's a halachic thing. The other part of the picture is the mystical part of it, the Kabbalistic value of having a beard. It says that there's something called the Yud Gimel Dekuni Dikna. The 13 paths of kindness come through the beard. The legend is that the Baal Shem Tov beard had 13 different strands. But be it as it may, so there is coming from Lag BaOmer, which is the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, the mystical part of the Torah. So that's good to mention that this week, that there is, from the mystical point of view, there's a lot of value in having a beard. So that's it. So then those that do it have upon whom to rely, but this is the reason why Chassidim are very particular about having a beard.
So that's good. That answers my question from last week. Okay. Now let's move on to this week. We're going to talk a little bit differently this week. I would say one of the biggest things that you do on campus, and I think the Chabad Shliach mission really is bringing Jews closer to Judaism. Inviting people for Shabbos, getting them in for a Seder, for Pesach, whatever, getting them to wrap tefillin, during the day, whatever it is, just something to get them to go out and do a mitzvah. And I think the perfect goal, eventually, right, is to get everyone to come to the fully observant life. But you certainly don't necessarily push particularly hard, I would say. Certainly, you would enjoy if everyone moved that direction. But I find that you take more of a relaxed approach than I think some people might. So what goes into your approach when it comes to bringing students closer to halacha?
First of all, I take that... I think it's actually pretty humorous that anybody should say that my approach is the calm, laid-back, warm, fuzzy approach. But that's how
warm and fuzzy when you're getting to know them. After the fact is a different story.
So, I was once at a presentation of a student. He actually went to MIT back in the day, and he was doing a dual doctorate PhD at Harvard, MIT, and he presented this machine to help a person breathe. What's it called?
Like a respirator?
A respirator, yeah. But the thing what he was saying was like this. And he gave the presentation in layman's terms. I understood exactly what he was saying. And then he got into the technical stuff. I lost him. But he's saying normally the way it works is that the machine pushes air into the person's mouth and into his lungs. But then what happens to a person if the body is is exhaling and the machine is inhaling? So somehow he made it, calibrated it, that it should be in tune with the person's body. So when the person's inhaling, the machine will push the air forward, and when not, it won't. And I took that and so that night, Friday night, and I don't think he knew I was there. There was a lot of people. I came in, it was Friday afternoon, so I came there and I left after he finished his talk. I said, let me tell you something. The way you have to influence people is you don't push it into them. When they're not receiving, you push against them, it backfires. And in fact, if you have a respirator, the way to do it, and he's sitting with his mouth wide open, like, what? How did you know this? So this it's actually a very big challenge. I'll explain to you why. Yes, we're out there trying to get people to do mitzvahs. But even to the point, let's say, putting on tefillin with people. If you meet somebody on campus, you want to put on tefillin. There comes, there are certain students, I know I meet them, I just, here we're putting on tefillin because it's been already a whole year. I made them beginning of the semester. They know, they understand it. They may want to do it themselves, but they just are too lazy. For whatever reason, they don't, but they're totally into it. Then there's this one kid who actually put on tefillin in our welcome barbecue. And that was his first time put on tefillin, made a big deal about it. And then when I met him during the year, he started becoming, once a week, once every 2 weeks, he'd put on. And then he became very reluctant to do it. He didn't want to do it anymore. And his point was, he said to me, I'm not religious, I'm Reform, whatever. I grew up Reform, I don't do this thing. And I realized that if I would push him, it would just push him away. He didn't appreciate doing it. So when I see him, I'll say tefillin, and he'll say no, and then we move on. We just let the subject slip. So there was an Israel day, and we had a table there, and it was very nice. A bunch of universities had a table representing the university, and I was doing the tefillin, and he came over and he said, "Oh, of course you're going to put on tefillin to Israel day," and he put on tefillin willingly, like he had no problem with it. So I realized that in the right setting, he'll want to do it. So to push him and to get him to do it then, or maybe he won't do it, and he'll despise it, he'll hate it. Like, I don't want to hear you, and then he'll have a negative feeling with me as well, as, oh, well, you wanted me to do this, and I don't want to do it, and it won't be a productive relationship. So the key over here is to know where the person is, and then try to urge him along, and it's very difficult to know that. Who was the expert in knowing exactly where the person is and where to go? The Rebbe, of course. That was the brilliance of the Rebbe, the famous Yechidus, private audience that the Rebbe had with Frank Lautenberg. And it was the more, interesting, when the Rebbe used to meet people in his office for private audiences, it would start at 8 o'clock at night, and it can go as long as, they would have a schedule of people who were coming in. But they had no idea how long it's going to take. Sometimes the conversation would be 5 minutes, and sometimes the secretary says, "Go in and come out, make it quick." And the Rebbe would want to talk to that person and would wave off the secretary and talk to the person for 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, who knows. So the more important you were, the more of a public figure you were, they would make the appointment later on. So the people that came early, people who were only going to spend a few minutes. Like, for example, if you were going in because it was your birthday, or for or bar mitzvah, which is very, a relatively short yechidus, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. They would go earlier in the evening, and then the people that would be longer would stay longer. So Lautenberg, and that people are always surprised. They said, "Oh, we're going to have an appointment with Lubavitcher Rebbe." It's like, be here exactly at 1 a.m. You mean 1 p.m.? No, 1 a.m. And we can't guarantee you'll get in on time either. So it was very fascinating. Anyway, so Frank Lautenberg was one of those late night yichidus, and was there for a long, long time. He wasn't a senator then. I think he was the head of some major Jewish organization, federation. And at the end of the whole thing, talking about community affairs and everything else, the Rebbe said, "Mr. Lautenberg, if you leave here and you are the same person that came in, I haven't accomplished anything." And the Rebbe urged him to start putting on tefillin. So the Rebbe was able to narrow it, and so after talking about all major community affairs, to be able to get down, are you going to do a mitzvah tomorrow? If you're going to do a mitzvah this morning or the next day, then we know we've accomplished something. And I think that's how the Rebbe, so I'm saying the Rebbe was the expert in looking at a person, saying, here we go. Beryl Weiss, you don't know, remember that name? He was a businessman in Los Angeles. Baruch Hashem, he's a blessed memory, has a couple wonderful children. One of them was my classmate. And he was a very successful businessman. And he came to the Rebbe because the shliach there, who was Shmuel David Reichik, was a shliach there, brought him to the Rebbe, and he got connected to the Rebbe in a very powerful, wonderful way. And he once went to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe for something. And the Rebbe said he wants Torah and Gedula in one place. Torah and Gedula means you have like Torah study and wealth. And the Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, "Grow a beard." And he said, "What?" The Rebbe said, "Grow a beard." it was like a series of things that went on where He in a home, he asked his children, he asked his wife, and it took a little while till he finally did it. And then subsequently, when it came for dollars, getting back to the beer things, the all connected, the Rebbe gave him $13 for the 13 attributes of mercy. He did it twice. You can see it on the video. The Rebbe gave him $13. So, and he was like flabbergasted. Like why? Like he was, why a beer? Like what happened here? And the question is, he didn't have a beard until that time. He used to shave. Why didn't the Rebbe ask him a year before or 5 years before? Because at that moment, and whether the Rebbe knew his personality or from some spiritual stuff, I can't get into what the Rebbe does. But for some reason, that was the thing. There's another amazing story with Professor Green, who from Minnesota. Whole story how he became from, but we won't get into that right now. But he wrote a letter to the Rebbe wrote a letter about evolution. Basically, the point of the letter was there's interpolation and extrapolation. Interpolation and extrapolation.
I think the words he's looking for are interpolation and extrapolation.
Yes, extrapolation. It's not. I don't know the words. So basically, the idea is if you have point A and point B, you know where A is, you know where B is, you know what's going on in between A and B. You can figure it out. You can predict what will happen in between. But if you go outside of point A and outside of point B, you don't know what's going to happen there. So, and that's basically saying that evolution is we know A to B, and we're figuring out what happened before, or what could have happened after. And that was what the Rebbe's premise was. And he had big issues with that, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, basically stating what he felt, how he felt the Rebbe had erred about this subject. And the Rebbe didn't answer him. Until that time, when he wrote to the Rebbe, he always got answers. No answer. And he kept on. He didn't. It wasn't that he was going to stop his journey into observant Judaism. It was only a year later or something that he asked the Rebbe. He said, "How come you didn't?" That the Rebbe answered him about it, and he said to the Rebbe, "How come you didn't answer for a year?" And the Rebbe said to him, "At the point you asked, I knew you weren't ready to hear the answer, and all it would do is it would push you away." And the Rebbe didn't use his words, but basically the point is, might win the battle and lose the war. I knew that this, so I figured it's not important. If it's not interfering with your observant to Judaism, what's my point of winning that argument? I'm not here to win arguments. I'm here to get people, and that was so there also, the Rebbe was very sensitive to where he was holding and to know how to go. Now, for simple people like myself, I'm very simple. It's very difficult to know. And so we have certain guidance. Like the Rebbe gives us the 10 mitzvah campaigns. Put on tefillin, have mezuzah, Torah study. And so those are things that and you just have to know how to be a good respirator, to push when a person's able to receive, and then when it's exhaling, to back off a little bit. And we try our best.
Is it ever, I guess, frustrating? I don't know if that's the right word to use, but when you see students who maybe they're here almost every Shabbos or every other Shabbos, or they come to a class, or you see them all the time, and every single time you ask them if they want to wrap tefillin, they put on tefillin, but it doesn't seem like they're going any further. They're not getting all the way to that perfect observant life, or are you content to just do what you can at the present moment?
It's extremely frustrating when you know a guy for 2-3 years and he refuses to go to yeshiva. So, it's graduation time now. And it's interesting that you bring up this question, because I think about it a lot. Because as long as a student is in school, it's like, okay, he didn't put on last week, I'll get him to do it next week. He didn't do X this week, he'll do it next week. And then graduation is like, okay, he's leaving. He or she is leaving. It's over. Whatever you could have accomplished, you accomplished. And what you didn't accomplish, it's pretty much, you can still have connection, but it's not going to be the same thing. And so it's a time of introspection, like taking stock of like how well have we done with these students and what's going to be. And so in a way, it's a very exciting time. In a way, it's very, I don't want to say depressing. We don't get depressed, but it's like it's sad. Like, oh my, you're leaving. That's it. We brought them to that point, and that's it. So again, it goes back to remembering that we are not in charge. Hashem runs the world, and What we need to do is put our best efforts in. And the accomplishment that'll happen will happen. So on a human level, in some way, it's somewhat frustrating. But I tell you, as you know, in the beginning it was more so, and then as time goes on, you just realize you're not in control of people's lives. You're there to serve up a smorgasbord of Judaism that is delicious, enticing, attractive, meaningful, and fulfilling. And if they're going to take from it, they're going to take from it. If they're not going to take from it, so be it. That's how it is. So, I think it's very, very important that the shliach, the one who's there to get Jews close to Judaism, shouldn't get too caught up in themselves. It's about me. How much have I accomplished? How much have I done? And, people say to me, actually, it happened a lot when I first came out, the first few years. How many people did you make from? How many people do you make religious? And the question was detestable. I said, I make cholent for Shabbos. I don't make people anything. I don't know what that even means. What does he make people from? If they do it, and I'll tell you, in a way, I've changed my attitude 180 degrees. Every time, I think about this. Why do kids I meet them in the street, in the student union, they come to Chabad. Why do they put on film when I ask them to put on film? To me, it's the other way around. These kids that come from very little religious training, why would they do this thing? Why would they, we'll meet you every Thursday and meet this kid to put on film. What happens the rest of the week, I'm not even sure. But why does he make an issue of doing it then? And he's into it. Or, other kids who never done it before and get committed to it. So we believe in the Jewish soul, the neshama, second chapter of Tanya, absolute part of Hashem. And I think when you touch a person's neshama, things happen. And that's fantastic. That's amazing. But since you're on the subject of frustrating, what really touches a chord that's very sensitive and is when somebody becomes very involved and observant, and somewhere later in life, it breaks off. And that's really, especially if they're married and they have children. I mean, thank God it's very, very unusual. But when it does occur, that's very difficult. That's really difficult. Because you just, and these are not people that you saying, it's not like they graduated 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it is. And what happened? How could that be? What could have been done? I don't even think what could be done. I don't think there's anything that could be done. It's just anytime a family member gets injured physically and here spiritually, it's yeah. And then you celebrate the victories. There's this one alum who was here and was very involved and was pretty much observant and got even more involved when she was here. And we haven't really been in strong contact. He lives in Israel. And just past week, we communicated because her daughter got engaged, and she needed to prove that she's Jewish. She lives in Israel for 15 years. So now she said, "How do I prove I'm Jewish?" So we're talking, and she started telling about all her children. I was like, "Well, this is amazing. This is beautiful. They're all living in Israel, and two of them got engaged in 1 week, and it was just so gorgeous." And so, and in my mind, she's a student. Because I didn't follow her life. After she got married, she moved to Israel. I didn't follow her along every step of the way. And so in my mind, I have the picture of student and now seeing the whole picture from where she was as a single woman, how she now is becoming a mother-in-law and all that, it's incredible. To me, it's miraculous. So to answer your question, I try not to make it about me. I try to make it to keep on going. You're on a mission. The mission is to bring Mashiach, one mitzvah at a time. Every mitzvah we get someone to do, it's a win for the Jewish people and by extension the world. And not to let, the disappointments, if anything, if you can learn something, but I don't know, people are people that make their decisions. You don't know, only Hashem knows. And so therefore I just stay focused on the positive.
I'd say, I think there are two tracks that I look at and I think of as being really difficult. The first is you started off in a situation where growing up, you knew you were Jewish. Maybe you went to shul for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and that was basically it. Maybe you didn't eat non-kosher Pesach food, but you were still, your mom made non-kosher chicken or something, right? Like you weren't eating leavened things, but you were still eating non-kosher food. That type of upbringing. There's the upbringing where it just wasn't involved at all, and then there's the person who grew up in it, fell off, and maybe is trying to find their way back. And I think those are I think the really difficult thing about it is sometimes either there's a fear familially, so maybe the parents aren't necessarily as supportive of going on into that lifestyle as the individual may like, or maybe they've got a fear associated with, I don't know, just the lifestyle that they have being non-observant, and they feel like they're going to be missing out on things if they become observant. So what would you say is your biggest piece of advice for those people that are trying to find their way onto the derech?
Is this personal? Another Rebbe story.
I don't think it's possible to have a question that's answered by anything other than, like, there's a Rebbe story for everything.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. So this story is about the guy who was going to marry someone who wasn't Jewish, and his family had sent him a different rabbi, go talk to this one, that one, the other one, and it didn't help. And finally, he said, go talk to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And they're like, okay, I'll go. And so he ends up coming to the Rebbe, and he expected, the typical response that a rabbi would give. Don't do it, it's not good, and if you marry a Jew, it'll be good. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Don't marry someone not Jewish is not good, and marrying someone Jewish is wonderful and fantastic. And the Rebbe said to him, again, not quoting exactly, but he said to him, I'm jealous of you. He says, you're jealous of me? He says, yeah, because you have a test from Hashem, which means that Hashem gave you the power to overcome it. You have a challenge. God doesn't give challenges that you can't overcome. God doesn't ask us to do things we can't do. So Hashem gave you that challenge. It means you have incredible energy and potential to be able to overcome such a tremendous challenge. I never had that challenge. It means there's something special about you. So what the Rebbe was doing, again, fantastically, was uplifting the person and empowering him. You can do this. If Hashem gave you this test, you can do it. The point over here is exactly the same. When I always say this to people that become observant. I say, I'm amazed. I'm in awe of you. I'm in awe of the kid that comes to put on tefillin, on his own. Or even if you say, I'll meet you on campus and I'll do it. I'm in awe. I can't imagine my life any other way. It's not the fact that I understand why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it just because I was brought up that way. I understand. I can talk about it intellectually. But the fact is, I was brought up with it. So what would happen? I said, I don't know what would have happened if, I'm not a prophet. I can't tell you what would have happened. I know the facts of what did happen. But I'm looking at students that grew up the way you're talking, that you're discussing, and that they want to get more observant. It's like, wow, it's fascinating to me. So it means that and when I'm teaching them, I'm talking to them logically, so the logic clicks, it makes sense. And because we know that a Jew has an neshama, and every Jew wants to be connected to the Judaism. That's just a fact because they have a neshama. So each one has to have his challenges. Now, when they come to ask me advice, I cannot tell them. Normally you give advice that comes from a personal experience that you had in your own life. That's pretty much how people give advice. They put themselves in that position. It's hard for me to put myself in that position exactly because I was never in that position. But when we talk about family, there are ways, first of all, of having experience from different students, of how you go about it. And so each one of them has to, the family thing is very, very difficult. In a way, I'm happy. This is a secret. I'm happy I don't know the families of most of the students. I never met their parents. I don't know who they are. I never met them. I talk to the kid as he is, as an he or she as an individual. I don't see the context of his mother, his father. It's going to happen. Not that I'm afraid of it, but it's a certain purity there. I don't have to take into consideration anything else. And I, not talking in a very harsh way, just talking about Judaism and the importance of keeping Torah mitzvahs. And then when I meet the family, like, oh man, it's always fascinates me to meet the parents and see that's where you're coming from, that's your background, that's your, and to fill in the rest of the picture. So, everybody has to, in their own way, has to be able to. The person who grew up without any formal understanding of Yiddishkeit, so you're learning about it, And I was talking to an alum again from years and years ago. He's 2 married kids already, Baruch Hashem, total Lubavitch. It started out with coming to a Pesach Seder, and he said to me, he said, "You know why I came to that?" And he sat at my table. I remember that, and from that things went. He said, I was coming out of the elevator, and usually I go in one direction. I went in a different direction. I saw a flyer for the Seder, So hearing that story tells me that, God forbid to say it was random. Hashem runs the world. But that's what triggered him to come to a Seder at Chabad, and then how things take on after that. So there's so many things that how Hashem orchestrates that a person should come into contact. And that means that the person has an ability to embrace Judaism and Torah mitzvahs. And the challenges are challenges. Everybody has challenges. And I can tell you something else. When you talk about familial challenges, and this I thought about this really long and hard, many, many times the familial challenges, like if a student has a good relationship with their parents, the Yiddishkeit can happen very smooth. Sometimes there's issues before that or outside the Judaism. And so this just becomes another battleground. And that's we actually, when we came here, a few years after came here, we were talking to a couple, two therapists, psychologists, and they wanted to make a support group for parents of kids who became observant. Why a psychologist? Because it's a psychology thing. Why are you doing that? Because it's Jewish. And let me throw in this. I say this to parents when they say, thank you for what you've done to my child. I say, no. Thank you for allowing me to teach your child, number one. Number two is the thanks goes to you. Whenever a student becomes observant, it's because something their parents planted in their head. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. People don't come out of a black hole. They come from a background. So I say to the parents, we had one parent we had a very contentious relationship because their kid became observant and they were very upset. And we're going to go talk to the rabbi. I'm going to tell him. So I came and said, I said, what do you want from me? There's thousands of students. How many come to Chabad? Those that come to Chabad, how many come observant? So it's not my quote unquote fault, i.e. my credit. It's you. You must have put something in their head, planted a seed, and all I did was nurture it, that they would want to get involved in Judaism. So now that they've done it, of course, I always tell students, listen to this. During the pandemic, Mayanot, Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, had Zoom classes. And with the time difference, it didn't make sense for rabbis in Israel to begin, to give a class at 8 o'clock at night. I mean, it's it's 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock, whatever. So they asked me to give a class. So I had a weekly shir. One time I'm sitting there, we had the class on Zoom, and I see the guy's mother's hovering in the background. I'm thinking, oh, interesting. She said, is it okay if I listen? I said, sure, listen in, no problem. Then she sat down and she started telling me about her son. How she's Israeli, certain things she does, she wasn't fully observant, certain she does, she doesn't. And her son comes and one day tells her this, and the next day tells her that. And I said to the son, I said, you need to understand that you're learning. You can't just come and dump it on your mother. You have to discuss it with her. Explain what you've learned. Of course, you come home one day, you say, we have to separate milk and meat. Okay, great, we'll separate milk and meat. Next day you come and say, well, now we separate, you have to have new dishes. Then you come the next week and say, now we have to get glak kosher meat, and the next week, Chalav Yisrael milk. So in the course of 6 weeks, you've changed your diet 6 different times. You need to explain to your mother why that you've learned new things, and you can't expect it to jump every time you come. That time, and she was so thankful. And the student later sent me a message and thanked me as well. What I do, I just told him to communicate. And if you communicate, when you come home and say, I want to keep kosher, oh, that's terrible. It's Jewish. That's the bottom line. We're not talking about anything. There's no extremism here. We're talking about straight up Judaism. And if you care about the parents obviously care about Judaism, then there shouldn't be a problem.
I think it's a solid conversation, solid episode here. I think that's all the time we have for today. I'm not going to say for this Wednesday, because to be completely honest with all of you, you're listening to this right now and it's Wednesday, but for us it's Monday. We decided to get in a little bit early this week, as speaking of graduation, I had my final thing ever in school today. I had a final earlier today. I'm going home tomorrow. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to be remotely doing the Pos-cast, but it's going nowhere. We'll be here every week, every Wednesday. And starting next week, if you email me at shelman@bu.edu with the subject line, Ask the Rabbi, you can send me some questions. And if we have time at the end of the episodes, we might not necessarily do this every week, but if you send me in questions, I will ask your questions to the rabbi on your behalf. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.